Good morning, guys. Papa D here, Papa D's Range Time, and welcome to my range. And as you can see, today I'm not on my range. I'm at Shooters Paradise Incorporated in Ethel, Louisiana. Here today, I'm with Rolf Perelius.
Correct.
And he is an instructor of NRA programs of the Mossad Ayub
Correct.
group with the MAG 20 and various other courses. He does reloading and probably 14, 15 different NRA classes.
I'm an NRA training counselor, so we teach both the student courses and instructor courses. I think currently we've got like 36 different classes we're offering.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
that's a lot.
Almost every weekend, and we have Double D here joining us today. He runs the house. So I get questions all the time about training from people that explore the class, and they want to know a little bit more about what to do and how and why. And their basic question is, well, I can hit what I aim at. Why do I need training?
So that's a very good question. There's actually three different things we need to consider when we look at self-defense with a firearm. The first being we need skills. Then after we have skills so we can hit what we aim at, then we need to have tactics, which is how we apply skills. And that's a whole separate thing, learning how I go about applying those skills of being able to hit what I aim at. And then we have to have strategy, which is the overall method we're going to win. And so there's deep stuff there that goes far beyond the first step of being able to hit what I can aim at.
So you're saying stress may come into training and trying to take and get this thing together?
That's a whole nother thing too. Besides my overall plan for success, the effects of adrenaline is a huge thing that people generally are just completely unaware of. That if somebody is actually trying to kill me, I will have a massive adrenaline dump. And I can either be trampled by this stallion of adrenaline, or I can ride it. And I can in effect have superpowers. Adrenaline gives us super strength. All the stories you've heard about grandmothers picking up cars to save family.
Yeah.
Yes, pushing a piano out of a house during a fire. These things. That's purely the benefit of adrenaline.
So you're saying I'm not going to get that if I'm standing in a range, indoor range, and have a target that's static and I'm static with the perfect grip and everything else. I'm not going to be able to simulate that?
Exactly. Yep. So there's a whole bunch of separate issues in the training thing that we need to look at. It's not just a simple, well, I can hit what I'm aiming at. That's step one.
And then we progress from there through various courses. I know on my range I use a timer a lot, trying to simulate speed and accuracy.
Sure.
And being able to take and have something to gauge how we are doing. And I know that's just a very small part, but that is what I can take and...
A timer adds a good bit of stress.
I know in competitions, whenever I was doing the USPSA, it seemed like whenever the timer would go off, my heart rate would go up by double.
Yes.
The shaking and everything else.
It is important to realize, though, that stress does not duplicate the adrenal stress that we'll face, because there's a whole bunch of other changes that will come about under adrenaline that we're not going to get just from the timer. It's like, sometimes the trainer will have you run out to the entrance of the range and back again and then go to shoot and you're shaking and all.
Right.
That is stress, but it's not the kind of stress that we'll see under adrenaline, because it doesn't affect how your eyes work. It doesn't affect the other organs in the body. It's just a higher level of physical output. So that's valuable. It's very valuable to know how you will perform under those situations, but it's not a perfect
training.
It's not a perfect corollary. We can't reproduce that. The ideal way to reproduce that would be to have someone try to kill us.
So that's where force on force training comes in?
Yes, and that's
proper?
Yes, proper force on force is the safest way that we can recreate this, and there's tremendous value that comes from that, but it has to be done correctly.
And because you don't want to input the wrong scenario or the wrong training.
Right, because we get into memory now, and there's different kinds of memory. Generally, a memory is like broken into two main groups: implicit memory and explicit memory. So implicit memory is memory that can't be put into words. Explicit memory is like, yesterday I rode my bike down to the store. Stuff that I can explain is explicit memory.
Okay.
So it's those two main groups. But in memory, we have stuff that's stored in the thinking part of our brain. Then we have stuff that's stored in the subconscious part of our brain. And we also have stuff that's stored in the emotional part of our brain. It gets deep here.
We have a lot of parts of the brain.
Yes. And the thing is that under adrenaline, the subconscious brain is in control when we're under adrenaline, and it can't access all of that memory. And this is where you'll see someone who's highly trained in a martial art who gets into a situation that's life and death, and there'll be a video camera videoing the situation, and you'll see that he doesn't use his training. Well, that's why, because his subconscious brain didn't have access to the stored memory files for the training. It's in effect the subconscious brain doesn't know his training. And force on force actually allows us to put those memories into the subconscious brain. So then it knows that.
And that can relate to that. I train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu through Excelsior in my hometown of Zachary, Louisiana. And the instructor is very detailed in how he breaks down each of the moves. We drill them, but I know whenever we start live rolling, that doesn't
Sometimes stuff goes out the window.
Yeah, it's more of a survival than it is resorting back, okay, I should take and move this hand here and here, but it's more of a fight or flight.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. And the deal is that if I'm having to think about what I'm doing, I'm going to lose.
By the time the thought process, I know my opponent has already gone to 2 other steps.
Exactly. So it has to be instinctual. If it's not just instinct to do this thing, then it's not going to work. Knowing something and thinking about it is completely different than what we need in a fight for our lives.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And he's a wealth of knowledge, and I've been trying to if I could download your brain into mine so I could take and understand some of this stuff. But I feel like sometimes it's a fire hose, but a little by little I'm going to take and keep eating this elephant and find out more and more.
Sure.
So and we've touched on it already, but the benefits of training in self-defense takes and gives us the natural ability to get into our brain to be able to access our training?
Yeah. So we'll look at the 3 different kinds of memory. There's the standard memory that we have when we memorize stuff for a test in a class. Okay. That's your standard memory. There's no stress or maybe if there's a test at school, there could be some, but there's no life and death stress involved. Okay. And I can think and access those memories. Then in the subconscious mind, in the thalamus, that memory there is called procedural memory, and that is like your seatbelt. Do you remember putting on your seatbelt before you came here today?
No, I did it. But...
Do you remember taking off your seatbelt? No. You see that, but that's a complex action, and you were able to do that without any realization you were doing it. And so that is procedural memory. How many times have you put on and taken off a seatbelt? You've done it so many times that the brain can do this without using any thought to do it.
Okay.
So that's procedural memory. And you can imagine how powerful a self-defense technique would be if you put it there. You didn't even have to think about it. Highly trained martial artists will say, I don't know how many times I hit the dude. That's because their techniques were in the procedural memory. And there was no actual thought process involved in using them. It was just defend yourself. And they did all these fancy techniques because they were put in the procedural memory. And we get it there by doing an action somewhere between 4,000 or 5,000 times. People say you do it 10,000 times. My research has shown that it's probably somewhere in the realm of 4,000 to 5,000 repetitions of a technique can put it into the procedural memory.
So that's where dry fire comes,
absolutely.
You end up being able to take and pull,
absolutely,
get on target and pull the trigger.
Because if I have to think about drawing the gun, I'm dead. That has to be all happen on its own.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yep. And so that's one way, and that's actually probably, it takes a lot of work to get the memory there and the skill there, but that is a very solid way to do it. The problem is, if I'm not learning the right techniques from the start, I've put the wrong stuff in there and I can't stop doing it that way.
Did take an act of Congress in order to
Yes,
reverse
you
it.
can overwrite those memories, but it's hard to do, and it takes a huge level of commitment to do that.
I know I've trained with many different instructors, been very fortunate to have some great ones trying to take and learn each and every technique properly in order to better myself, to be the best that I can be. And the way that you break down the why is phenomenal for me. It gives me the reason why I want to train more, to be able to come back, to find out the next step, or to go back to the first step and to hear it again.
Sure.
I don't have a problem taking classes over and over again because I want to know every detail of the class, of the training, and to be, again, the best that I can be.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me, if you don't mind, let me talk to the next layer of...
Okay, yes.
So the third layer, and the mind can be basically broken down into three separate parts. Okay. So you've got the thinking brain, then you have the subconscious brain, like when somebody panics, that's the subconscious brain.
Okay.
And then you have the emotional brain, which is tied into, it's part of the subconscious brain. And that's where force-on-force training comes in, because if you learn a lesson, maybe a painful lesson, you learn a lesson under adrenaline, it gets burned into that emotional part of the brain. And so one repetition, well, let me ask you, this is the famous example. Did you ever touch a hot stove as a child?
Very much so.
And how many times did you have to do that before you learned not to touch the hot stove?
Even though I was a slow learner, that one I learned pretty quick. That was just once.
Yes, exactly. Now, dry fire, we're going to do something 4,000, 5,000 times to learn it. Here, we can learn it through one iteration. But I guarantee you had an adrenaline dump when you touched that hot stove and burned that hand. So when we learn a lesson under the effects of adrenaline, one iteration of it will burn it into that emotional part of the brain. And that's accessible to the subconscious part of the brain.
Okay.
So that's where force-on-force is so valuable if it's well scripted and well run, so it's imprinting the correct thing. Because, whoa, if we imprint the incorrect thing, that's going to be a problem. And it only takes one mistake one time to do that. So you can see how important it is that force-on-force is run correctly and properly.
Yes.
But anything we learn under an adrenaline dump, it's there once. We learn it just like that.
That's amazing. So I'd love to take and keep diving into this, but
move on.
Moving on. So I'm learning training, I'm self-defense training, I'm going to classes and everything. In the event that I get into a self-defense shooting, does my training benefit me in any way with the law enforcement or my self-defense? I've been told that I'm going to be arrested.
Okay, so
likely.
Yeah, that you need to be prepared to be arrested. There's no guarantee you will be. If it is clearly self-defense and it happens inside your home and they kick the door down to get in, you can expect not to be arrested in that situation. If it's not clearly self-defense, you can expect to be arrested because we can't have murderers wandering the streets.
Correct.
So we have to verify, was this really self-defense? So if there's any question about it, you could expect to be arrested. And there's a whole school of thought about that and how to handle that. But to answer your question about the training, your training, if you've documented it, if you have notes, if you have documented when that training occurred, it can be of huge value to you in the courtroom, besides you learning the things you shouldn't do and the things you shouldn't say. I was waiting for a chance to get... That's probably not the thing to say after you've had to defend yourself,
And I know in a couple of your classes you had talked about mailing, and I'm not going to get into that right now.
Sure.
But you have other ways through some of your classes of how to further protect yourself, and that's Shooters Paradise Incorporated in Ethel. He has a webpage, and I'll have his webpage linked in my description on this YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I figured out how to do that, so I'm learning technology. I'm finally getting into the 21st century. But guys, it's super important to, one, document what you do, keep track of it, train. How often should I train?
Well, that's a big question. What we would like to see is that people go to the range to practice their skill, because skill is perishable and it will disappear on me. We'd like to see people once a month going to the range and at least shooting a box of ammunition. And ideally, we would like to see them working on something specific, not just going to play and pew, pew, pew. That really can ingrain bad stuff in our brains rather than good stuff. So we would like to see the training be productive, where they're actually trying to work on something specific. So once a month, 50 rounds once a month, I think is achievable for the average Joe.
Right.
And then we'd like to see between 1 and 3 formal classes a year. What I've found in my own life is that if I try to take 6 high-level classes in a year, it's overload, and I can't process it. It takes a good amount of time after class to process all the information I've been exposed to.
So how do you pick out the right instructor?
Oh, that's a huge topic. That's a big deal. I would say, number one, you have to find out who's really good in the industry, so that then you know whose recommendations to listen to.
Okay.
That's really tough, but I would go to the old guard, the people that have been doing this for 100 years, like Tom Gibbons, Masada Ayub, Marty Hayes, James Fleming, Gunsight, Thunder Ranch. These people, look at their recommendations and start from there. When it comes down to a local level, what I would do is, after I've read a little bit about Tom Gibbons and Masada Ayub and some of these other people that are doing the high-level training, what I would do is I would ask my local instructor, what do you think about Masada Ayub? If they don't know who he is, that's a clue. What do you think about Tom Gibbons? If they've never heard of Tom Gibbons or John Farnham, that's a clue.
Okay.
So that might be a place to start.
And did you start with NRA classes? I mean, since you're so in depth with the NRA, or did you?
No, actually, I didn't. I found a dude who was an incredible shooter and took some classes with him, took 3 or 4 classes with him, and then didn't do any formal education in firearms for a number of years, and then started into some student classes with the NRA and realized, whoa, this is good stuff. And that's when I decided that I wanted to teach, and so I started getting instructor credentials in the NRA, and then moved from there to actually teaching people to be instructors as a training counselor.
Okay.
And the NRA is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the firearms world, so.
I know they're definitely staying active in the legislative process.
Sure.
So, and as far as the NRA, you can go to the NRA website to look for their training classes in your area. If you're within 150 miles of Rolfe, I highly recommend you come here.
Appreciate that.
The way that you present things, and again, the why, so that I can understand, and I have to tie everything together in my mind. Okay, I can hit my target. I'm pretty good at speed and accuracy and stuff like that. But the why of when to shoot, when not to shoot, what to look for, the interview process of somebody looking at me, he has gone into things that I never would have thought about, and I'm assuming through the NRA training and the books that you read to be able to present this information.
Yeah, so a lot of the fine points I'm getting from specific high-level trainers that are not NRA, but what I've found over the years is the NRA training is a good middle of the road.
Okay. The Chevrolet of training. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, what I'm talking about is there's left field and right field.
Okay.
You don't want to be out in left field, you don't want to be out in right field. You want to be in the middle of whatever this is that you're doing.
Okay.
That'll be the most safe and normal place to be.
Okay.
And what I found is the NRA training really is that. And you have to remember that NRA programs evolve over the years, and there are 200,000 instructors that are giving input to the NRA. These programs are not developed by one guy. These programs are developed by input from NRA instructors over the years and hundreds of thousands of people. So that there's a lot of value there. And of course, it also is true that the instructor makes the program.
I can agree with that.
So
Yes.
you could find a guy that does a poor job of teaching the best class in the world. So.
And we do have some fine instructors around here. I know
Oh,
there's a range
absolutely.
in Baton Rouge that
Absolutely.
gives all kind of classes, and you're almost every weekend you're giving classes to some degree.
Yep.
Guys, I just wanted you to take and meet Rolf. I wanted to give you a little bit of information about the why and, you know, the training part of it, why it's important. I really appreciate you watching, liking and sharing this. And if you get something out of it, take and share it with your friends. And this is Papa D signing off, and I will see you down the road on the next video.